Judge Camille Turner was driving home after a long, exhausting day in court. The sun had set, and the city streets were calm as she navigated through the suburban neighborhood she often passed on her commute. Her briefcase and a stack of legal files rested on the passenger seat, her mind replaying the day's proceedings. Camille had worked hard to become one of the youngest and most respected judges in her city. She wore her black robe like a shield of justice, proud of the fairness she upheld in her courtroom. As she approached a quiet intersection, the red and blue lights of a police car lit up behind her. Surprised, Camille glanced at her speedometer. She wasn't speeding, and her car was in perfect condition. Confused but calm, she pulled over to the side of the road and turned off her engine. She adjusted her mirror to watch the officer approach her car. The officer, a tall man with a stern face, stopped just short of her window. "License and registration," he demanded in a tone that lacked any hint of courtesy. Camille rolled down her window and handed him her license and registration without hesitation. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked politely, her voice steady. The officer, whose name tag read Mitchell, looked over her documents briefly before asking, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm on my way home," she replied simply. Her calm demeanor seemed to irritate him. "This doesn't look like your neighborhood," he said, his tone sharp. "Why are you really here?" Camille's heart sank slightly, but she kept her composure. She was no stranger to moments like this, moments where she had to prove herself in ways others didn't. "Officer," she said evenly, "I have a right to drive through any neighborhood. Is there a specific reason you stopped me?" Officer Mitchell's expression hardened. "There have been reports of suspicious activity in this area. I need to ask you to step out of the car." Camille took a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew her rights, but she also understood the delicate balance required in situations like this. "Officer, I've provided my license and registration. There's nothing suspicious about me driving through here. Can you tell me what I've done wrong?" Her composed response seemed to further agitate him. "Step out of the car, ma'am," he said more firmly. Camille hesitated. She reached into her purse and pulled out her badge, not a police badge, but the one that identified her as a sitting judge. She held it up so he could see it clearly. "Officer Mitchell, I am Judge Camille Turner. I expect to be treated with the same respect as any citizen." The officer froze, his eyes darting between her badge and her face. For a moment, there was silence. Then, instead of backing down, his demeanor shifted into defensive arrogance. "Being a judge doesn't mean you're above the law," he snapped. Camille felt a spark of frustration but stayed composed. "And being a police officer doesn't mean you can create the law as you see fit," she replied, her voice calm but firm. The tension in the air was palpable. Other cars slowed as they passed, drivers glancing at the unusual scene. Camille remained in her seat, her hands resting on the steering wheel, waiting to see what would happen next. She knew this encounter was far from over, but she was prepared to stand her ground, calmly, firmly, and with the dignity she always carried. Officer Mitchell stood frozen for a moment, his eyes flicking back and forth between Judge Camille Turner's badge and her calm, unshaken expression. He hadn't expected this. The woman sitting in front of him didn't fit the narrative he built in his mind. For a moment, it seemed like he might back down, but then his pride kicked in. "Judge or not," he said curtly, "I still need you to step out of the car. This is for your safety and mine." Camille's expression didn't change, but inside, she felt a pang of frustration. She had encountered bias before, but this situation was escalating unnecessarily. Still, she knew better than to argue on the side of the road. Calmly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. As she stepped out, the cool night air brushed against her, and she stood tall, her professional attire immaculate, and her posture commanding. "Now, officer," she said, her voice steady, "I would like to know exactly why you've pulled me over. I've done nothing wrong." Mitchell crossed his arms, as if trying to regain control of the situation. "There have been reports of suspicious activity in this neighborhood," he repeated. "And your car matches the description of one reported earlier." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious activity? What exactly was reported, officer? Because I find it hard to believe that driving home from work in a professional vehicle counts as suspicious." Her words were measured, but they carried a weight that Mitchell couldn't ignore. He hesitated, clearly flustered, but before he could respond, another car pulled up behind the patrol car. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, walking briskly toward them. It was Chief Daniels, the head of the local police department. "Mitchell," the chief called out, his voice sharp. "What's going on here?" Mitchell's face paled. "Chief, I was conducting a routine traffic stop," he stammered. Chief Daniels glanced at Camille and then at her badge, which she still held in her hand. His expression immediately shifted to one of respect. "Judge Turner," he said, his tone apologetic, "I had no idea you were involved. Please accept my sincerest apologies for this misunderstanding." Camille nodded politely but didn't lower her guard. "Chief Daniels, I appreciate your professionalism, but I believe this situation requires a closer look. Officer Mitchell has yet to explain why I was stopped in the first place." The chief turned to Mitchell, his eyes narrowing. "Officer, you said this was a routine stop. Did Judge Turner break any laws?" Mitchell stammered, "No, sir, but—" "Then why is she out of her car?" the chief demanded, his voice firm. "And why was she pulled over?" Mitchell's mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. Finally, Chief Daniels turned back to Camille. "Judge Turner, again, I apologize. I'll be addressing this immediately." Camille gave a small nod, her voice calm. "Thank you, Chief Daniels. I trust this will be handled appropriately." She stepped back toward her car, her calm exterior masking the mix of emotions swirling inside her. As she sat behind the wheel, she saw Chief Daniels leading a visibly shaken Mitchell back to the patrol car. Camille took a deep breath. She had stood her ground with grace and dignity, but she knew this encounter wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger, something she couldn't ignore. As she drove away, her mind raced. She knew this moment wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a story that needed to be told, a story that could spark change in ways she had always believed in. The drive home was quiet, but Judge Camille Turner's thoughts were anything but. The incident with Officer Mitchell lingered in her mind, not because she hadn't handled it well, but because it represented a larger issue. As a judge, Camille had spent her career upholding the law and ensuring fairness, but tonight had reminded her that not everyone experienced the same sense of justice, even when they were doing nothing wrong. When Camille pulled into her driveway, her husband, Marcus, was waiting for her on the porch. He stood up as she stepped out of the car, concern etched on his face. "You're late," he said gently. "Everything okay?" Camille nodded but didn't smile. "Not exactly," she said, walking up the steps to join him. "I got pulled over on my way home." Marcus frowned. "What? Why?" She sighed, recounting the entire encounter. Marcus listened intently, his jaw tightening as she explained how the officer had treated her. "And even after I showed him my badge, he still tried to push his authority," she finished, shaking her head. "It wasn't until Chief Daniels showed up that it ended." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This isn't just about one officer, Camille. You know that." "I do," she said quietly, "but that's why I can't let it go." The next morning, Camille arrived at her courtroom with a renewed sense of purpose. As she sat at her bench, presiding over her cases, her mind continued to drift back to the night before. When her docket was clear for the afternoon, she called for a recess and retreated to her chambers. There, she began drafting a formal letter to the police department, outlining the encounter and her concerns about the treatment she had received. Her letter wasn't just a complaint. It was a call to action. Camille knew that change didn't come from silence. It came from speaking up, even when it was uncomfortable. She emphasized the need for better training, accountability, and community engagement. If someone like me, a judge, can experience this, she wrote, what about those who don't have the privilege of authority to protect them? Later that day, Camille decided to take another step. She reached out to Chief Daniels and requested a meeting. To her surprise, he agreed immediately. "Judge Turner," he said over the phone, "I'm deeply sorry for what happened. Let's sit down and discuss how we can address this." The following week, Camille found herself sitting across from Chief Daniels in his office. He was sincere in his apology, but Camille made it clear that apologies weren't enough. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about ensuring that no one is treated unfairly. Your officers need to understand the impact of their actions." Chief Daniels nodded. "I agree, Judge. I've already started looking into additional training programs, but I'd welcome your input." Camille appreciated his willingness to listen, but she didn't stop there. "I also think the community needs to be involved. Let's host a town hall meeting. Let people share their experiences, and let's start rebuilding trust." The chief hesitated but then nodded. "You're right. It's time for a change." As Camille left the station, she felt a flicker of hope. The encounter with Officer Mitchell had been unsettling, but it had also sparked an opportunity for progress. Camille wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever felt the sting of injustice. And she wasn't going to stop until she made a difference. The news of Judge Camille Turner's meeting with Chief Daniels spread quickly throughout the community. It didn't take long for people to start talking about her plans for a town hall meeting. Camille wanted it to be more than just a chance to air grievances. She wanted it to be a platform for change. She envisioned a gathering where citizens, police officers, and community leaders could come together, share their experiences, and work toward solutions. Camille spent the next few days organizing the event with Chief Daniels and other city officials. They chose a large community center as the venue, a place familiar to many residents. Flyers were distributed, announcements were made on local radio, and social media buzzed with anticipation. Camille wasn't sure how many people would attend, but she hoped it would be enough to make an impact. On the evening of the meeting, the community center was packed. Rows of chairs filled the main hall, and people stood along the walls, eager to participate. The crowd was diverse, young and old, families and individuals, all coming together to be part of something important. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, a mixture of curiosity and determination. Camille stood at the front of the room, dressed in a simple but elegant suit. She glanced around, taking in the faces of her neighbors, her colleagues, and even a few police officers who had come in uniform. Chief Daniels was seated to her right, his expression serious but supportive. Taking a deep breath, Camille stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This meeting is not about blame. It's about understanding. It's about finding a way to move forward together." The room was silent as she continued. "A few days ago, I had an encounter with an officer that left me deeply unsettled. It reminded me that, despite the progress we've made, there's still work to be done. Tonight, we're here to talk about how we can do better, not just as individuals, but as a community." Camille invited people to come up and share their stories. One by one, they approached the microphone. A young man spoke about being stopped repeatedly on his way home from work. A mother shared her fear for her teenage son, who often walked home after dark. Even some police officers shared their challenges, explaining how hard it was to balance authority with compassion in high-pressure situations. The room buzzed with emotion, anger, sadness, and hope. Camille listened intently, taking notes and thanking each speaker for their courage. Chief Daniels also spoke, acknowledging the need for better training and communication between officers and the community. As the evening went on, Camille noticed something remarkable. People weren't just sharing complaints, they were suggesting solutions. Ideas like mentorship programs, community policing initiatives, and workshops to build trust began to emerge. It was clear that, despite their differences, everyone in the room wanted the same thing: a safer, more respectful community. By the end of the night, Camille felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The meeting hadn't solved every problem, but it was a start. It had given people a voice and a space to be heard. As the crowd began to disperse, several attendees approached Camille to thank her personally. Judge Turner, one elderly woman said, gripping her hand tightly, "You've given us hope. Thank you for standing up and bringing us together." Camille smiled warmly, her heart full. "We're all in this together," she replied. "And together, we'll make it better." As she left the community center that night, Camille knew there was still a long road ahead. But she also knew they had taken the first step, and that was something worth celebrating. The day after the town hall meeting, the entire community was buzzing with hope and energy. Camille received numerous emails and phone calls from residents who wanted to thank her for organizing the event. Many said they felt heard for the first time in years. Even Chief Daniels called her to express his gratitude and to discuss the next steps. "I think the meeting went better than any of us expected," Chief Daniels said. "We've got a lot of work to do, but I'm optimistic." "So am I," Camille replied. "Now it's about turning those ideas into action." Camille and Chief Daniels began working on an action plan. One of the first steps was creating a community policing program, where officers would spend more time engaging with residents in non-enforcement roles. The idea was to build relationships and trust between the police and the people they served. Officers would attend neighborhood events, visit schools, and even host coffee meetups where residents could talk to them informally. Meanwhile, Camille started working on a mentorship program for young people in the community. She reached out to local business owners, educators, and other professionals to volunteer their time. The program would pair mentors with students, giving them guidance and support to navigate challenges and achieve their goals. Camille also wanted to ensure the police department received the training they needed. She worked with experts to design workshops on cultural sensitivity, conflict resolution, and de-escalation techniques. Chief Daniels promised to make the training mandatory for all officers. As these initiatives began to take shape, Camille made sure to involve the community every step of the way. She held regular meetings to provide updates and gather feedback. Residents appreciated her transparency and felt empowered knowing their voices were making a difference. One sunny Saturday, Camille attended the first event of the new community policing program, a picnic in the park organized by the police department. Officers mingled with families, playing games with the kids and serving food. The atmosphere was light and joyful, a stark contrast to the tension that had once defined their interactions. Camille watched as Officer Mitchell, the same officer who had pulled her over, handed out popsicles to a group of children. She noticed how his posture was more relaxed and his demeanor more approachable. When their eyes met, he hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Judge Turner," he said, his tone more respectful than she'd ever heard. "I wanted to thank you for what you've done. It's made me think a lot about how I approach my job." Camille nodded, her expression kind. "Growth is never easy, Officer Mitchell, but it's always worth it. I appreciate your willingness to reflect and improve." As the picnic continued, Camille felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. The changes were small, but they were real. People were connecting in ways they hadn't before, and the seeds of trust were beginning to grow. That evening, as Camille sat on her porch with her husband, Marcus, she reflected on how far they had come. "Do you think this will last?" she asked him. Marcus smiled and took her hand. "It will if people like you keep leading the way." Camille leaned back, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in a while, she felt hopeful. Together, they were building something better, one step, one conversation, and one act of kindness at a time. Weeks passed, and the changes in the community began to take root. The new community policing program gained momentum, with officers becoming a familiar presence at neighborhood events, schools, and local businesses. The shift was noticeable. Conversations replaced suspicion, and connections started forming where there had once been tension. Camille watched all of this unfold with a sense of pride, but she knew the work wasn't done. One afternoon, Camille visited a local high school to speak at a career day event. She stood before a room of eager students, sharing her journey of becoming a judge. She spoke about the importance of resilience, fairness, and using one's voice to create change. The students listened intently, their eyes wide with admiration. After her talk, a young girl approached her. "Judge Turner," the girl said shyly, "I've never met someone like you before. I didn't think someone who looked like me could be a judge." Camille knelt down slightly to meet her eyes. "You can be anything you want to be," she said warmly. "The only limits are the ones you set for yourself. And when challenges come, face them with courage and kindness." The girl smiled, her confidence visibly growing. Camille's heart swelled with pride. Moments like this reminded her why she had chosen this path, to inspire others and make a lasting difference. Later that evening, Camille attended another community meeting, this time focused on the mentorship program she had launched. Several young participants and their mentors shared stories of how the program was already making an impact. One teenager spoke about how her mentor had helped her apply for college, something she never thought possible. A local business owner shared how mentoring a young man had given him a fresh perspective and a renewed sense of purpose. As Camille listened, she noticed Officer Mitchell sitting quietly in the back of the room. After the meeting, he approached her. "Judge Turner," he began, his tone thoughtful, "I've been volunteering with the program. I didn't think it would make such a difference, but it has. These kids, they just need someone to believe in them." Camille smiled. "That's all anyone needs, Officer Mitchell. A little belief can go a long way." Their conversation was interrupted by a group of residents who had gathered around Camille, eager to thank her for her leadership. "You've brought us all together," one woman said. "This community feels different now. Better." Camille nodded humbly. "It's not just me," she said. "This is all of us, working together. Change happens when we listen to each other and take action." As she left the meeting, Camille felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The community was transforming, not just on the surface, but in its very foundation. People were building relationships, sharing their experiences, and finding common ground. The walls of misunderstanding and mistrust were slowly being replaced with bridges of empathy and connection. At home, Camille shared the day's events with Marcus. He listened with pride, his admiration for her evident in his smile. "You've done something incredible here, Camille," he said. "You've turned a difficult moment into an opportunity for growth." Camille leaned back in her chair, her heart full. "It's not just about me," she said. "It's about all of us choosing to do better." As the night settled around them, Camille felt a renewed sense of hope. The journey wasn't over, but they were moving in the right direction, together. Months had passed since the night Camille Turner was pulled over by Officer Mitchell. The changes in the community were undeniable. What began as a moment of frustration had grown into a movement of understanding and collaboration. Camille often reflected on how far they had come, but she knew there was always more to do. One sunny afternoon, the community gathered for a large event at the local park, a celebration of progress and unity. It was a bright and lively scene, with families enjoying picnics, children playing games, and local musicians performing on a small stage. Camille was at the center of it all, walking through the crowd, greeting neighbors, and listening to their stories. As she moved from one group to another, Camille noticed Officer Mitchell standing near the stage. He was helping organize a group of teenagers who had volunteered to hand out water bottles to the attendees. He seemed more confident and approachable than she had ever seen him. Camille decided to approach him. "Officer Mitchell," she said with a warm smile, "you look busy." He turned to her, his expression light. "Judge Turner," he replied. "It's good to see you here. The kids have been great today. They're doing most of the work." Camille chuckled. "That's how you know you're doing it right. Let them take the lead, and just guide them when they need it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the crowd. Then Mitchell spoke, his tone more serious. "I want to thank you again. Judge Turner. For everything. This community feels different now, and I know it's because of what you started. Camille shook her head. I didn't start this, Officer Mitchell. The community did. I just helped bring people together. He nodded thoughtfully. Still, you showed me that I could do better, and I'm trying to. Camille placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice kind but firm. That's all anyone can ask for. Keep trying, and keep listening. As the event continued, Camille took the stage to address the crowd. The microphone buzzed slightly as she adjusted it, but the noise quickly settled. The crowd grew quiet, all eyes on her. Good afternoon, everyone, she began, her voice steady and clear. Today is about celebrating how far we've come as a community. It's about recognizing the power of coming together, listening to each other, and choosing to build something better. She paused, letting her words sink in. A few months ago, I had an experience that could have left me angry or discouraged. But instead, it reminded me of the strength we have when we choose understanding over division. And today, I see that strength in all of you. The crowd erupted into applause, and Camille smiled, her heart full. She continued, sharing stories of the programs they had implemented and the changes they had seen. She emphasized that the journey was far from over, but that they were moving in the right direction. After her speech, residents approached her, expressing their gratitude and sharing their hopes for the future. One young boy even handed her a drawing he had made of the community, with smiling faces and bright skies. "This is what you helped create," he said proudly. Camille knelt down, accepting the drawing with a grateful smile. "You're part of this too," she said. "Never forget that." As the sun began to set, the park buzzed with laughter and joy. Camille stood with Marcus, watching the scene before her. "You've made a real difference," he said, his voice filled with pride. Camille nodded, her gaze steady. "We all did, and we'll keep going." That night, as the stars filled the sky, Camille felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead might still hold challenges, but she knew her community was strong enough to face them together.